Hi, this is Brian Kim. I'm going to share with you case number 173 in the best way to do cataract surgery series. This is a 1+10 lens, and you're going to see efficient lens disassembly, double chop, cross chop, mechanical fracturing like I normally do, and then an efficient and straightforward Hydrus microstent technique, and you're going to see 120 degrees of blanching at the end of the case. So this is the eye. You can see a really nice pupil, clear cornea. I'm using the cotton tip to steady the eye and then using a corneal marker to help me center and size the rhexis. I use a cotton tip to steady the eye and to make my paracentesis incision first on the right side and then the left side, making sure I'm flat to the iris plane, which creates a nice corneal shelf, which will allow me to achieve a self-sealing incision. This is intracameral lidocaine, and then some intracameral epinephrine, and then dispersive viscoelastic. And this is a triplanar corneal incision. I make a vertical groove, place the blade into the deep part of the groove. I'm using the cannula to control the eye, and when I'm ready to enter, I turn the eye towards me with the cannula, and then I enter. That helps me control the length of my incision. Either the sharp tip Haldi-Perkar forceps, I go in sideways, go straight up and down now, puncture the center. Again, the sharp tip acts like a nice cystotome. I'm able to grab the right side of the tear, which again allows me to titrate and control the size of the rhexis. Again, the low profile minimizes OVD egress and reduces oar-locking within the incision. You can see a very well-controlled rhexis. I'm able to go around confidently. Very little radialization forces. As I do this, I'm taking my time. And even sub-incisional, I still have a great view, not too much corneal stria there. And then I finish off the rhexis. Burp some viscoelastic out. And this is the capsular fornix hydrodissection technique. I place a cannula under the rhexis edge, contra-incisionally, point the tip down, get a nice wave, turn the tip back up. The lens is starting to come out. Go ahead and push it back down. When the lens comes up, that means you know you've decompressed the bag anyway. Sweeping underneath the anterior capsule on the left side and then the right side, you can see the lens begins to spin nicely here. So again, nice loose lens separated from the capsular bag. Irrigating the surface of the eye, adjusting my sleeve, lifting the incision with the chopper, going in with irrigation off to minimize Descemet's trauma. I'm going to remove the surface epinuclear material. I have the chopper pronated. I'm going to lead with the chopper tip going underneath the epinuclear ridge, getting out to the equator, tilting the chopper vertically, so I get around the lens, tilting the ficca tip vertically, sub-incisionally, bringing the instruments together, and it just cuts the lens so easily. Place the chopper around the right heminucleus, pull it centrally toward the ficca tip, and it fractures that right heminucleus so fast and so efficiently. Again, that's in normal speed. So again, I'm going to show this in slow motion for those of you who want to see it. Again, removing the epinuclear material in the center with the ficca tip, leading with the chopper pronated, sliding it underneath the epinuclear ridge. This ensures you're definitely within the bag. Rotating the chopper vertically and then the ficca tip vertically, bringing the instruments together. It cuts the lens completely in half. Again, the peripheral lens material is soft, so you're able to just cut through it very easily. Pronating my hand for the chopper, sliding it underneath the rhexis edge on the right side, pulling it centrally toward the ficca tip, and in that case, it cuts the right heminucleus very easily. Why? Because the chopper is the cutter and the ficca tip is the chopping block. So lift that first quadrant up with some vacuum and then mashing the lens into smaller pieces and then emulsifying the lens piece. So that's the beauty of cross chop. Again, the chopper is a cutter and the ficca tip is a chopping block or cutting board in this instance. So again, did the same maneuver on that second quadrant, bringing that chopper around the lens equator, pulling it centrally towards the ficca tip, and then it cuts the lens against the ficca tip. Again, it's acting like a cutting board or a chopping block. This lens is fairly soft. You can see the rest of this is coming out fairly easily with high vacuum and no ultrasonic energy. Rotating that second heminucleus in front of me, placing the chopper around the lens, hugging the peripheral lens, didn't quite go, repositioned again with some vacuum, and then I'm able to crush the lens in half. Grabbing that third quadrant up with some vacuum and then mashing it with the instruments and then emulsifying the lens piece. There's a small piece that's trying to get away from me, grab that. And this is the last quadrant, trying to get around it, using some vacuum to lift it up first, and then getting underneath it with the chopper, and then mashing the lens between the instruments. So again, you just have to figure out ways, creative ways to just mash the lens. It doesn't matter how you do it, you just have to do it. And you can do it in any which way because of the concepts that I discussed. So I take the chopper out, push BSS in, take the phaco tip out, and I go in with the INA handpiece, start subincisionally, peeling off the cortex from anterior to posterior the best that I can. Polishing underneath the anterior capsule, removing the lens epithelial cells and any stubborn cortical material that may be there. So again, you saw how efficiently the lens disassembly was. This is a 1+ dense lens, but CDE is 0 because I'm using mechanical forces. When you have a soft lens, you try to sculpt through that, it's just going to fall apart. And then cracking a soft lens is basically futile. Once you've made a trough, it just kind of falls apart. Lollipopping a lens like this, vertical chop would be awful for this technique. It makes no sense when you have a sharp instrument like that. It's just kind of cheese wires. And so the hardest part for a lot of people is getting around the entire girth of the lens, right? All of these techniques, you don't get around the girth of the lens when you sculpt, when you do vertical chop. The only other technique, which is kind of like a precursor to this technique, is really horizontal chop. With horizontal chop, you do get around the lens with the chopper, but the concept of using the phaco tip as a chopper is novel, and no one's really thought about that. And so that's why I do it this way. I'm able to use the phaco tip as a chopper too, and that's why it's a dual chopper or a double chopper technique. And in those moments, no ultrasonic energy or vacuum is used. And so that's why you can place that phaco tip very confidently anyway, in any location in the bag or in the eye, and not worry about causing any problems. So you see I'm pulsing the subincisional capsule fornix. You see a lot of lens material was liberated there. And so again, you have to be mindful of that when you're dealing with cortical removal in some cases. Sometimes it doesn't come off nice and clean. And then if you don't check it, you don't know. So using that cannula is really helpful. Help me, as I tell my staff, get rid of the dust bunnies. You know, the dust bunnies in your house and underneath your couch are those that you didn't know were there until you start really looking. And they're kind of in the crevices of your house. And so I like to use that BSS cannula pulse into the subincisional capsule fornix. Again, you can go to bimanual IA and that would solve your problem too, but I like to not have to switch my instruments. I'm using the same instruments that I've been using throughout the entire case, and I can just pulse it with some BSS into the subincisional capsule fornix. It is a little bit of a challenge, and you have to have good bimanual dexterity when you do that, so I caution you, if you don't feel comfortable with those moves, don't do it. You don't want to rip the bag in the process. Filling the eye with cohesive viscoelastic to fill the bag, and turning off the INA and then coming out. You want to keep a nice stable chamber. Turn off the IA when you push the viscoelastic, otherwise you'll just push it out. Sweeping underneath the rexus edge, and you can see all that cortical material starting to come out in the subincisional area. So that sweep is really helpful as well. It's a kind of a second mechanism to make sure that the capsular bag is nice and clean, especially in that subincisional area, since it's harder to reach with the IA. So I'm going in with a single piece acrylic lens, and I'm going to inject it into the capsular bag, making sure the leading edge definitely goes within the bag. Quickly switching to the INA handpiece, I go in with irrigation off, activate irrigation, and making sure the haptics are off the optic. And then I'm going to make my incision for my Hydrus. You know, this is not how I do it anymore. I want to make my Hydrus incision at the very beginning of the case because you can get hemorrhage. And so that's another pearl. Don't do what I did. Make your Hydrus incision at the very beginning of the case when you're making your cataract incisions at the same time. By then, all the bleeding will have stopped. So I turned the eye and I put viscoelastic on the surface. I filled the anterior chamber with ProVisc as well. And I'm checking my Hydrus microstent, making sure I can see the edge of it there. I turn the eye away from me. I turn the microscope away from me, and I make sure I get an en face view. En face is code word for kind of a perpendicular view. And how you know that is you have equal amounts of cornea seen above and then equal amounts of iris seen below. And the center should be your TM. So that's what en face view means. That's really just a fancy word to say you're straight on. So I have a nice view here. Again, I like to go into the anterior TM, angling a little bit high. You don't want to be parallel, you want to angle up, be fairly flat, and that little shovel on the microstent has to pierce through TM. Once you're there, you start to advance. You want to make sure and see that the hydrus is advancing and staying within the plane, and it has to be somewhat shiny. That means you're in good position, so it tracked along the entire area of trabecular meshwork in Schlemm's canal. So that's the end. I go ahead and push that little knob at the distal end. You want to push it in a little bit more so it's not sticking out so high. Go into low mag and making sure I see the entire hydrus. So you go in with irrigation off, activate irrigation. You want to get underneath the lens or just picking up where we left off for the cataract part, removing all the viscoelastic from within the bag. Put the optic back down. I go back underneath the lens. There's some wispy lens material that's still in the bag. Polishing that stuff off. Repositing the optic back down. Polishing underneath the rexus edge as well. Again, I must see some more stuff there. Again, it's hard to see on the video, but when you're doing the cataract surgery, you can see it as clear as day, this fine lens material, and just want to get rid of it. I don't want that to be a nidus for, causing quickly appearing PCO for this patient. Get rid of all that stuff, otherwise it'll be the nidus for PCO. Removing the viscoelastic from the anterior chamber. And you can see already that there's tremendous blanching, at least 120 degrees, maybe more, away from me where the hydrus is placed. You can see beautiful blanching of the conj there. Again, I go to low mag just to illustrate this point that I'm trying to make here, that there's excellent pushing of the BSS through Schlemm's canal along that entire contra-incisional area where the hydrus has been placed. Quickly transition to the BSS cannula, hydrating my incisions, and that's the end of the case. So again, this is a 1+ dense lens, fairly soft. You saw a very efficient lens disassembly with double chop, cross chop mechanical fracturing techniques. The concept of positioning the instruments around the lens and then just crushing it with opposing forces. This is very easy, very safe to do. Again, all these other techniques that you have really, to me, have a lot of limitations with the soft lens. Not so with this technique. Double chop, cross chop mechanical fracturing. Very efficient, very controlled. And the key is you're able to get around the lens. If you can get around the lens, and you can crush it. And if you can get around the lens, you don't have to depend upon vacuum to grab it. And which is very safe. If you can use mechanical forces to control the eye, that's far better than using super high vacuum to try to grab stuff. Because if you try to do that, you might grab the wrong thing, i.e. the posterior capsule or the iris or something like that. And so this is very well controlled. You can see, again, illustrated very clearly in this case. And you saw a very routine placement of the hydrus. Again, you want to angle up, stab into anterior TM, level off when you advance the hydrus. And in this case, it went very well. You saw excellent blanching, at least 120 degrees, and this patient did well after surgery. So I hope this was helpful to you, and I thank you for your attention.